The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Street as Officer Sarah Collins adjusted her radio and checked her weapon. Beside her, Max sat perfectly still in the passenger seat of their patrol unit, his dark eyes scanning the industrial landscape with the focused intensity that made him legendary in Atlanta PD's K-9 division. "Ready for another day, partner?" Sarah asked, running her fingers through Max's thick black and brown coat. The Belgian Malinois turned his head toward her, ears perked, tail giving a single authoritative wag. 6 years together had taught Sarah to read every subtle signal from her four-legged partner, and right now, Max was all business. They pulled away from the precinct, beginning their familiar route through Atlanta's industrial district. Warehouses lined both sides of the street, their brick facades weathered by decades of Georgia heat and humidity. This area had seen better days. Many of the buildings stood empty now, their windows boarded up, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. As they approached the abandoned Millbrook textile factory, Sarah noticed Max's posture change. His ears shot forward, and a low rumble emanated from deep in his chest. She slowed the patrol car, watching as Max's head turned toward the same section of brick wall they'd passed hundreds of times before. "What is it, boy?" Sarah pulled over and killed the engine. Max was already scratching at the car door, his breathing quick and shallow. Something had captured his attention completely. The moment Sarah opened the door, Max bolted toward the wall, his nose working frantically along a specific section about 4 feet from the ground. His behavior was unlike anything Sarah had seen in their years together. Max was disciplined, precise. He didn't chase shadows or get distracted by random scents. "Max, heel!" Sarah commanded, but for the first time she could remember, Max ignored her. He began barking at the wall with an urgency that made Sarah's skin crawl. These weren't casual alert barks, they were desperate, insistent sounds that seemed to come from somewhere primal. Sarah approached cautiously, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. The wall looked ordinary enough, old red brick, mortar crumbling in places, nothing that should warrant this kind of reaction from her partner. "What's got you so worked up?" she muttered, running her hand along the bricks where Max continued to paw and whine. The mortar felt different here, newer somehow, though it was hard to tell in the dim morning light. Max's barking intensified, and he began digging at the base of the wall with his powerful claws, sending small chunks of concrete flying. Sarah had never seen him this agitated, this focused on something she couldn't detect. Okay, she said, pulling out her phone to call for backup. "If you think there's something here, then there's something here." Within an hour, 2 additional patrol units and a maintenance crew arrived at the scene. Sarah felt slightly foolish explaining that her K-9 partner had a strong interest in this particular wall, but Max's reputation preceded him. In 6 years, he'd never been wrong about anything. The maintenance supervisor, a gruff man named Eddie, examined the wall with a flashlight. "This mortar's definitely been replaced," he confirmed. "Recently too, maybe in the last couple years. See how it's a different color?" Sarah's pulse quickened. Max sat beside her, still alert but calmer now that humans were finally paying attention to his discovery. His tail wagged once, as if to say, "I told you so." "Can you get through it?" Sarah asked. Eddie nodded and signaled to his crew. The sound of drilling filled the air as they worked to remove a section of the newer mortar. Max watched intently, his ears forward, body tense with anticipation. After 20 minutes of careful work, Eddie's drill bit suddenly punched through into empty space. "There's definitely a cavity back here," he announced. "Looks like someone walled something up." Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Collins, what's your status over there?" "We've got a situation dispatch, requesting a crime scene unit to Millbrook Street. My K-9 partner has located what appears to be a concealed compartment in an abandoned building." As the crew carefully removed more bricks, a dark, hollow space became visible. Sarah clicked on her flashlight and peered inside. The beam illuminated something that made her blood run cold, a small cloth bag, some papers, and what looked like a child's worn sneaker. Max pressed against her leg, his warm body providing comfort as Sarah realized they'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a routine patrol. Her partner's instincts had led them to evidence that someone had gone to great lengths to hide. "Good boy, Max," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Very good boy." But as Sarah stared into that dark cavity, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Max had found was just the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The industrial district suddenly felt much more dangerous, and Sarah found herself grateful for the loyal partner standing guard beside her. The evidence bag sat on Detective Morrison's desk like a time bomb. Sarah Collins stared at the child's sneaker through the clear plastic, her stomach churning as she recognized the faded cartoon character on the side, a popular design from the early 2000s. "This changes everything," Morrison said, pulling up files on his computer screen. "The moment I saw that shoe, I knew exactly what case this belongs to." Max lay beside Sarah's chair, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes alert, still processing the sense from their morning discovery. Even here in the sterile detective bureau, he seemed to sense the gravity of what they'd uncovered. Morrison turned his monitor toward Sarah. 3 school photos stared back at her. 2 boys and a girl, all around 8 or 9 years old, all with the bright smiles of children who had no idea their faces would soon be plastered on missing person flyers across Atlanta. Michael Thompson, age 8. David Rodriguez, age 9. Emma Chen, age 7, Morrison read from the case file. All disappeared within a 6-week period in the spring of 2004. Different neighborhoods, different schools, but all vanished without a trace. Sarah leaned forward, studying the photos. "I remember hearing about this case during training. It was before my time, but every cop in Atlanta knows about the 3 missing kids. Biggest manhunt in department history," Morrison confirmed. "We had federal agents, volunteer searchers, psychics calling in tips. Nothing. These children just disappeared into thin air." The detective pulled out a thick manila folder, its edges worn from years of handling. Lead investigator was Detective Frank Brennan. Retired now, lives up in Marietta. He worked this case for 15 years before hanging it up. Nearly drove him to drink. Sarah's radio crackled. "Collins, crime scene needs you back at Millbrook Street." They found more items. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Max stood watching as the CSI team carefully extracted items from the hidden cavity. More pieces of children's clothing, a small backpack with Emma written in childish handwriting, and a manila envelope sealed with duct tape. "Don't open that here," the lead CSI tech warned. "Could be evidence we've been looking for 2 decades. This needs to go straight to the lab." Max's behavior had returned to normal, but Sarah noticed how he kept checking the wall, as if making sure the secrets were finally being brought to light. His job was done, but something in his posture suggested he knew this was far from over. Back at the precinct, Captain Rodriguez called Sarah into his office. The captain was a 25-year veteran who'd worked the original case as a young patrol officer. "Collins, I need to know, has your K-9 shown interest in this location before?" 3 weeks, sir. Every time we pass that wall, Max gets agitated. I thought it might be a dead animal or drug residue, but his behavior was different. More urgent." Captain Rodriguez nodded grimly. The original investigation focused on the immediate areas where each child was last seen. We never expanded the search to include the industrial district, too far from the abduction sites. He pulled out a map of Atlanta, marking 3 red X's. "Look at this pattern. Michael was taken from Piedmont Park, David from a school playground in Virginia Highland, Emma from outside a grocery store in Buckhead. All upscale areas, all at least 5 miles from Millbrook Street." Sarah studied the map. Whoever took them knew the city well enough to transport them across town without being detected. "More than that," the captain said. "Someone with intimate knowledge of our investigation methods. The wall your partner found, it's been sealed for years, maybe decades. Whoever put those items there knew we'd never think to look in an abandoned factory." The phone rang, and Captain Rodriguez answered. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a grim expression. That was the lab. The envelope contained newspaper clippings about the case, plus handwritten notes detailing our investigation progress. Someone was following every move we made. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think it was someone inside the department? Or someone with close access to inside information? The notes mentioned details that were never released to the public, interview locations, evidence we collected, even which officers were assigned to specific aspects of the case. Max stirred beside Sarah's chair, his ears perking up as if he sensed the tension in the room. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, finding comfort in his steady presence. "Sir, what's our next move?" Captain Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "We're reopening the case officially. I want you and Max to work with Detective Morrison on this. Your partner found evidence that's been hidden for 20 years. Maybe he can help us find more." As Sarah left the captain's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching, waiting, hoping the evidence would never surface. The careful way those items had been concealed suggested someone who understood police procedure intimately. Max walked beside her, his tactical harness catching the fluorescent light. In 6 years of partnership, he'd never led her astray. But as they headed back to their patrol unit, Sarah realized they weren't just investigating a cold case anymore. They were hunting someone who'd been hiding in plain sight for 2 decades. Someone who might still be out there, watching their every move. Sarah's apartment felt different when she came home that evening. Max noticed it too. His ears were up before they even reached the front door, and he did a complete security sweep of every room before settling down. "Just nerves, boy," Sarah told him, but she double-checked the locks anyway. She spread the case files across her kitchen table, studying crime scene photos and witness statements from 2004. The 3 children had vanished with surgical precision. No witnesses, no struggles, no trace evidence left behind. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join them." Sarah's blood ran cold. She screenshot the message and immediately called Detective Morrison. "How many people know we reopened this case?" she asked when Morrison answered. "Just the captain, me, you, and the CSI team." "Why?" Sarah read him the text. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "That confirms it. Someone's been watching our investigation. I'm sending a patrol unit to your building." Max was already pacing by the window, his low growl indicating he sensed danger before Sarah's phone had even buzzed. His training kicked in. He positioned himself between Sarah and the door, every muscle tense and ready. The next morning brought more disturbing news. Detective Morrison met Sarah at the precinct with a grim expression. "We ran the newspaper clippings from the hidden cavity through document analysis," he said. "They weren't cut from papers available to the public. Some of these articles were from advance copies that only went to law enforcement and selected media contacts." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Someone with access to police communications. Gets worse. I pulled the original case assignments from 2004. Guess who was part of the evidence processing team?" Morrison slid a personnel file across the desk. The photo showed a man in his 40s with thinning hair and cold eyes. Detective Ray Hutchins. He handled evidence logging for the first 2 weeks of the investigation. Where is he now? Retired in 2018. Lives alone in a house about 2 miles from the Millbrook Street factory. And Sarah, 3 more children have gone missing in Atlanta since 2004. Different years, different circumstances, but all unsolved. Max's behavior during their morning patrol was different. Every shadow seemed to put him on high alert, and he kept looking over his shoulder, as if tracking something Sarah couldn't see. When they passed the Millbrook Street factory, Max immediately focused on a sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there the day before. His hackles rose, and he released a warning bark that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Easy, partner," she whispered, but she noted the license plate and called it in. The car was registered to Ray Hutchins. Sarah's radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's urgent voice. "Collins, we need you and Morrison at Hutchins' address immediately. Patrol units are already en route." The house on Pine Valley Road looked ordinary from the outside. Neat lawn, painted shutters, the kind of place that wouldn't attract attention. But Max's reaction was immediate and violent. He lunged toward the house, barking with an intensity that raised alarms in every fiber of Sarah's being. "He's picking up something," Sarah told Morrison as they waited for the search warrant. "Multiple scents, and he's agitated in a way I've never seen." When the warrant arrived, the search team discovered Hutchins' basement workshop. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about missing children cases, not just from Atlanta, but from cities across the southeast. Photos, maps, and detailed timelines showed an obsession spanning decades. But the most chilling discovery was a journal, meticulously documenting not just the original 3 cases, but 6 other child abductions that had never been connected. Hutchins had been active for over 20 years, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. Max found the most damning evidence in a hidden compartment beneath the basement stairs. More personal items from missing children, each carefully preserved in plastic bags with dates and locations written in Hutchins' precise handwriting. "He kept trophies," Morrison said, his voice tight with disgust. "And he's been documenting our investigation since day one. Look at this." The most recent journal entries contain detailed notes about Sarah and Max's discovery at the factory, including photos taken from a distance showing them at the crime scene. "He's been watching us," Sarah realized, "following our every move." Max suddenly alerted to something outside. Through the basement window, Sarah saw the sedan from Millbrook Street parked at the end of the block. As they watched, the car slowly pulled away. "He's not here," Morrison said into his radio. "Suspect is mobile and aware we're onto him." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text. "Your dog found my old hiding place. Clever, but I have new ones." This time, there was an attachment, a photo of the elementary school where Emma Chen had attended in 2004. Children were visible in the playground. "He's going after more kids," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Max was already moving toward the stairs, his training and instincts telling him the hunt was far from over. For 20 years, Ray Hutchins had operated in the shadows, using his inside knowledge to stay ahead of every investigation. But now, Sarah and Max were closing in, and Hutchins knew it. The text messages weren't just threats, they were declarations of war. Sarah checked her weapon and followed Max up the stairs. Somewhere in Atlanta, a killer who'd evaded justice for 2 decades was planning his next move. But this time, he wasn't just hunting children, he was hunting the K-9 team that had finally exposed his secrets. The elementary school was in lockdown within minutes of Sarah's call. Children huddled in classrooms, while SWAT teams swept the perimeter. But Ray Hutchins was nowhere to be found. He'd sent the photo to taunt them, to show he could strike anywhere, any time. Sarah and Max sat in their patrol unit outside the school, both on edge. Max's head moved constantly, tracking scents and sounds that might indicate danger. His protective instincts had shifted into overdrive. Every person who approached their vehicle was met with a low, warning growl. "He's playing games with us," Detective Morrison said through the radio. "We've got units at every school in the district, but this feels like a diversion." Sarah's phone buzzed. Another message from Hutchins. "Look behind you." Her blood turned to ice. In the rearview mirror, she saw the familiar sedan parked 2 blocks away. As she watched, it slowly began moving toward them. "Morrison, he's here," Sarah radioed, starting the engine. "Black sedan, heading north on Peachtree from the school." Max was already alert, his body coiled like a spring. He could sense Sarah's tension, and his training told him to prepare for action. The sedan suddenly accelerated, blowing through a red light and turning sharply onto a side street. Sarah hit her sirens and followed, Max bracing himself as they took the corner at high speed. "All units, suspect vehicle is fleeing north on Baker Street," Sarah called out, adrenaline surging through her system, requesting immediate backup. Hutchins led them through a maze of residential streets, clearly familiar with every turn. He was driving erratically but precisely, like someone who'd planned multiple escape routes. Sarah realized this wasn't a panicked flight. It was a carefully orchestrated chase designed to separate her from backup units. "He's leading us somewhere specific," she muttered to Max, who remained focused on the pursuit ahead. The sedan suddenly veered into the industrial district, heading straight for the abandoned areas near the Millbrook factory. Sarah's radio crackled with static as they moved into the dead zones between cell towers. "Morrison, do you copy?" Nothing but static responded. Max whined softly, sensing they were being isolated from help. Sarah made a split-second decision. Instead of following Hutchins directly into what was obviously a trap, she took a parallel route through the industrial complex. Her gamble paid off. As Hutchins's sedan emerged from behind a warehouse, Sarah was waiting. She blocked his path with her patrol unit, and both vehicles came to a screeching halt 50 yards apart. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the ticking of cooling engines. Max's breathing was controlled but rapid, his eyes locked on the sedan, where Ray Hutchins sat motionless behind the wheel. Then Hutchins stepped out of his car, and Sarah saw he was holding a pistol. "Come out, Officer Collins," he called across the empty lot. "Just you. Leave the dog in the car." Sarah keyed her radio, hoping for any signal. Static. Max began a low, continuous growl. His training told him to wait for Sarah's command, but every instinct screamed that the man across the lot was dangerous. 20 years I stayed ahead of all of you," Hutchins shouted. "I knew every move you'd make before you made it. But that damn dog of yours, he found what no one else could find." Sarah slowly opened her door, keeping her hands visible but ready to draw her weapon. Max immediately tried to follow, but she commanded him to stay. Every fiber of her being wanted her partner beside her, but she couldn't risk Max getting shot. "You were supposed to be one of us," Sarah called back. "Those children trusted police officers." Hutchins laughed bitterly. "Those children were practice. I got better over the years, more careful. Your investigation would have died with that wall if your mutt hadn't gotten lucky." Behind Sarah, Max's growling intensified. He could smell something on the wind that Sarah couldn't detect. Other scents, old death, fear that had soaked into this place over many years. "This is where you brought them," Sarah realized, looking around the desolate industrial area. "Not just Michael, David, and Emma, all of them. Smart girl. Too bad you won't live to testify about it." Hutchins raised his pistol, but Max had been waiting for exactly this moment. Despite Sarah's command to stay, his protective instincts overrode everything else. He exploded through the patrol car's open door like a black and brown missile. Sarah drew her weapon as Max charged across the lot, covering the distance in seconds. Hutchins swung his gun toward the attacking dog, but Max was too fast, too well-trained, and too determined to protect his partner. The impact sent Hutchins sprawling. His pistol flew across the concrete as Max's jaws clamped down on his gun arm. Hutchins screamed, trying to fight off 80 pounds of muscle and fury, but Max held on with the determination of a dog who understood exactly what kind of monster he'd caught. Sarah reached them just as backup units came screaming into the industrial complex, their sirens echoing off the empty warehouses. "Good boy, Max," she gasped, scratching behind his ears as he maintained his grip on Hutchins' arm. "Very good boy." Ray Hutchins lay on the concrete, defeated by the same kind of precise police work he'd once practiced himself. But this time, the most important member of the team had 4 legs and an unshakable sense of justice. As paramedics treated Hutchins' injuries and detectives read him his rights, Sarah knelt beside Max, holding him close. "You saved my life, partner," she whispered into his fur, "just like always." 3 weeks after Ray Hutchins' arrest, Sarah stood in the same spot where Max had first alerted to the wall. The Millbrook Street factory was now an active crime scene, with forensic teams carefully excavating areas that Max continued to identify with his precise nose work. "How many more sites do you think there are?" Detective Morrison asked, watching Max methodically work his way along the building's perimeter. "Max seems to think we're not done yet," Sarah replied, observing her partner's focused behavior. Even now, with Hutchins in custody, Max approached this location with the same intensity that had started everything. The confession had been devastating in its scope, Ray Hutchins had used his position as a detective to not only commit crimes, but to sabotage investigations. Over 20 years, he'd been responsible for the disappearances of 11 children across 3 states, always staying one step ahead by knowing exactly how police would respond. Captain Rodriguez approached with a folder in his hands. "Lab results from the additional sites Max identified," he said grimly. "We've recovered remains from 6 more victims. Without your partner's nose, we never would have found them." Max looked up from his work, tail wagging slightly, as if he understood the significance of what they'd accomplished. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hands through his fur. "The families finally have answers," she said softly. "Michael Thompson's parents called this morning. They said knowing what happened brings them peace, even after all these years." Morrison nodded. "Emma Chen's family is flying in from California for the memorial service. They want to meet Max personally." The memorial service 2 days later was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Families who'd lived with uncertainty for decades finally had closure. Michael, David, Emma, and 8 other children would be properly laid to rest, their killer finally brought to justice. Max wore his dress harness for the ceremony, sitting perfectly still beside Sarah as speaker after speaker praised the K9 team that had solved the unsolvable case. When Emma Chen's mother approached them afterward, Max seemed to sense her grief and gently placed his head against her hand. "Thank you," she whispered to both Sarah and Max. "Our little girl can finally come home." Back at the precinct, the K9 division had gained legendary status. Other departments were calling to learn about Max's techniques, and reporters wanted interviews about the dog who'd cracked a 20-year cold case. But Sarah knew the real story was simpler and more profound than any news article could capture. Max hadn't just detected evidence. He'd sensed evil that human investigators had missed. His instincts had cut through 2 decades of careful deception with the pure honesty that only a dog could provide. "The FBI wants to borrow Max for some cold cases up in Tennessee," Captain Rodriguez told Sarah during their debrief. "Seems word is getting around about his nose work." Sarah looked down at Max, who was contentedly chewing on his favorite rope toy. "What do you think, partner? Ready for more detective work?" Max's tail wagged enthusiastically, and Sarah laughed. After 6 years together, she should have known. Max lived for this work, finding truth, protecting innocence, serving justice. It wasn't just his job, it was his calling. Dr. Patricia Wells, the police psychologist who'd evaluated the case, had a theory about Max's behavior. "Dogs can detect chemical changes in environments that humans miss completely," she explained. But Max did something more than that. He sensed the wrongness of that place, the lingering trauma. Some dogs have that sensitivity. They're drawn to resolve imbalances. Sarah thought about that as she and Max drove their evening patrol. 3 weeks ago, Max had been just an exceptional K9 officer. Now he was the dog who'd brought justice to 11 families and exposed one of the most prolific killers in Atlanta's history. Their radio crackled with a routine call. Suspicious activity at a warehouse in the industrial district. Sarah looked at Max, who was already alert and ready for action. "Think this one might be important too?" she asked. Max's response was immediate. Ears forward, eyes bright. That unmistakable energy that meant he was ready to work. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah knew they'd face them together just as they had for 6 years. As they pulled up to the warehouse, Max's nose was already working, processing scents and information that would guide their next steps. Sarah trusted him completely, just as families across the Southeast now trusted that the K9 team of Collins and Max would find truth wherever it was hidden. The evening sun cast long shadows across the industrial landscape, but Sarah felt no fear. Beside her sat a partner whose instincts had proven sharper than any detective's logic, whose loyalty was absolute, and whose sense of justice was as pure as only a dog's could be. "Let's go to work, Max," she said, stepping out of the patrol unit. Max bounded ahead, ready for whatever they might discover, his tail wagging with the confidence of a dog who knew that together they could solve anything.